so here's my 2016 Raptor 700. I'm going to be doing some steering upgrades. It's midway through a much larger project with suspension and such, but doing this part now because the A-arms are off, and that'll allow a little bit easier access to the steering stem, etc. So what we'll be doing here is installing that longer steering stem, which will allow me to run different handlebars. You can see the original equipment ones just have kind of a large rise on them, and this will give me more flexibility to use aftermarket handlebars. So I also have new tie rods. The reason being is my A-arms are a little bit longer, so those will account for that 2-inch extra difference. And I chose to get new tie rod ends. Just those are, there's no Zerks on those from the factory, so figured since I can't grease them, I'll get newer ones, and those happen to be pretty heavy duty, and they actually weren't that expensive. I believe $20 to $30-ish range for each pair, so add a little extra reassurance considering this is a pretty expensive project to begin with. All right, what you'll need to get this done, so you have steering stem and the tie rod ends. So 17 millimeter wrench will get the tie rod ends off, and then 22 for the steering stem. That'll get that bottom accessed, and then up top here we have to remove some plastic. So we'll start with that 4 millimeter Allen key, and then that'll give us access to these bolts down in here, which are on the opposite side. Okay, so we'll get rolling here. It'll be a pretty great project. All right, so let me show you where we're at. I'm doing just a little more on this project because I'm going to be replacing the rear fender, but trying to gain access to those bolts in there and just make it easier to do the job. I'm going to remove this here. So these little clips there, the easiest way to get those out, just kind of, I mean there are other ways too, but you just kind of pry up on there, and then once that happens, that releases pressure from these prongs here, and then the whole thing can be removed and reused. Okay. And then I just like to put them back there so I don't lose them. There's a couple 10 millimeter hex heads, one in there, one in there, one there, then one way in the front. Then we can go ahead and just depress that and pull back. This has a clip here like this, and then it kind of swings out of the way. There we go. Oh, sometimes they go flying, so I'll grab that in a moment. One other thing too, when you're removing this piece of plastic over here, just be kind of careful because your gas cap has to be off. Don't get dirt into your tank. All right, so let's keep moving. All right, so I just wanted to highlight a few things as we move along here. So the fuel line gets removed with this clip here, kind of comes out of the way. And then underneath that though is there's this red clip. How you get that red clip off is there's these little kind of prongs or hooks here that reach around to each side, one on each side. Take a small screwdriver and you can kind of pry that up over, just over the lip. Hold it there with one hand, and then do the same thing to the other side, and then the whole thing will slide back. then I think it's best to put a plug in there to keep dirt from getting in there. Even a small amount of dirt can ruin your engine. In any case, the other thing I like to do along these phases is to clean things up. That does a few things. One, it lessens the chance that dirt's going to get into places you don't want it, like where grease bearings, etc. But also allows you a chance to inspect everything. So, take the moment while the gas tank's off, kind of look under here, just make sure everything looks the way it should. Maybe add a little dielectric grease to your connections, check your tightness of your fasteners, etc. One other thing that might have been harder to see in the earlier video, so we have these ties here. These are nice, and you can use zip ties, but these are actually a little wider, and they are technically reusable if you're careful with them. So I also use a flat blade like that, and when it's in there, I kind of put the flat blade between the ridges and the part that holds onto those ridges, and then you can usually pull it apart. Okay, and these are nice, give it a little bit more of a factory look than if you just got zip ties holding everything together. Now the gas tank comes off with 4 bolts. There's one there, one here, and then one over there. And then that's over there, and I also put a plug on that. Now the other part that is a little bit challenging if you're going to replace the whole tie rod, these get stuck in there pretty well. So actually what I did, so I put in a vise to help kind of hold it in place a little bit better. And then I applied heat to this area here. Even though I don't plan to reuse these ends, try not to wreck them and start them on fire. Especially if you're going to reuse those ends, you got to be careful with your heat. But I used a penetrating agent to sit on there for a day or two, kind of just getting it in there. And then after I applied the heat to here, I pounded on there and I was able to free that up. Okay, see it's starting to come out. Okay, but keep that castle nut, best is reversed like that, and then flush with the bolt. That way you have the greatest amount of surface area possible when you're pounding. That distributes the force of the pounding to lessen the chance you're going to distort those nuts or bolts. And again, even though we're not going to reuse those, it's good practice to try to get things off without wrecking them. All right, I'm getting ready to install the bar clamp on the steering stem. And this one's nice because it does have these rubber bushings in there to help kind of dampen vibration and movement. Now, the torque of these is pretty sensitive, and these are nylon locking nuts. Although they're nylon locking nuts, I actually will probably put a little thread sealer on there just to be a little extra careful. An important piece, though, is that they're tightened to 15 foot-pounds, but you tighten this one a little bit, this one a little bit, rotate back and forth until you're at 15 foot-pounds. Don't just crank one down and then go to the next one. The other thing is if you significantly exceed 15 foot-pounds, there's a little crush sleeve in here that'll get ruined, so just be careful to I just want to point out a couple things as we move on. So as I was removing the original equipment hard line, there is this clip. It lies under there like that. And you can get a long flathead like this and push against that little ledge right there and just push it out like this. Okay, so it's underneath here, and you just sort of push it out like that. Now, I got the aftermarket one in here. Now, I chose to route it right through where that used to go, but I also didn't want that rubbing on the hose, so I put a little heat shrink over that to help protect it. And down here, where those connections are, so in these brake lines technically don't require any type of thread sealant typically to stay sealed, but I don't like things to leak. It's more work later if they do. So I just use a little extra protection, put just a couple of wraps of Teflon tape around there. Okay. The other thing too is that if you're going to go ahead and replace your brake pads, these Allen or hex head bolts that hold the pads in place, they actually slide up and down there and they need to be removed, and they do have thread sealer on them. You can see that green thread sealer. So mine were pretty froze. The first one I tried to take off, I actually started to strip the hex, the inner relief for the hex head there. So I put some penetrating lube on there for a day or two, let it sit on there, and then the other ones came out just fine. But that one that I stripped out, I still couldn't get out, so I used just a little bit of heat, and I went to an American-sized hex head, so a 7/32, where typically that just requires a 5 millimeter. So the 7/32 is a bit bigger, so I actually used a hammer to kind of pound that in just to get enough purchase on the inside to get that loose. So it did require some heat and persuasion that way. So eventually I got it out. I'm not going to be able to reuse that one, but one little challenge I ran into. So in retrospect, I would have just put the rust penetrator on there, penetrating lube on there beforehand to make my life a little easier. All right, so I'm putting the new tie rods together. And a couple of things I want to just point out is my shop cat there keeping an eye on me. One of these is right-handed threads and the other one's left-handed threads, okay? And so keep that in mind. So you can't put the wrong one on the wrong side because it just won't thread in. But with these tie rods, the one that goes out towards the wheel has this relief in it, so you can turn that and adjust it. The other thing, I put a little grease on the threads because these do get seized in there sometimes later on, and you want to be able to adjust it with time. And they have this locking nut there to keep it from coming out of adjustment when you're riding. The other thing too is you want the threads to be in there equally. You don't want one of these in just a little ways and then the other one all the way in, because the strength you get from these things is based on the number of threads you have inside of here, meaning if you just have a few threads on, it could actually pull out. So what I did is I just rotate them in just to get the threads started by like 1, maybe 2 turns, and then hold both ends, both tie rod ends, and then just turn the rod, and then you'll know that you're actually putting the threads into each end equally, okay? So, I'll show you what that's like. So, basically, I just hold one end with my legs, hold the other end on something like that, and then you can rotate that, and then that will move on each thread equally. Alright, so this is what the nice CNC upper steering stem mount looks like. It's pretty nice compared to the original equipment, which is also quite functional, but the mating surface with the steering stem, which helps to reduce friction, is just this rubber or plastic here, whereas this one comes with this fairly smooth kind of hard plastic bushing that should reduce friction a little bit more. And you have to install that first before you install the steering stem because it is totally circular. Unlike these seals, which you can put on after it's installed because they actually have a cut in them that meets like that. The aftermarket one does use the original equipment seals, so I got new ones because the original ones actually are in pretty rough shape. You can see there with missing pieces of rubber. So don't forget to order those if you do get an aftermarket one. Alright, so here the steering stem is installed and it moves nice and smoothly. Be sure when you install the steering head here where the tie rod's attached, that is in center line. And then that nut is torqued to 130 foot-pounds. So good and tight. I did use some blue thread sealer on there, and then there's also a cotter pin that'll go across here to make sure that stays in place. Up here you can see how that nice CNC mount is. It looks pretty nice. I actually put an extra O-ring on top here that slides on top. The reason I did that is there's a little bit of a depression here where dirt and water can sit. That will kind of push on top of that and keep additional dirt and water from getting into there. So just a little extra measure, but looks pretty great. Now it's 2 inches taller as well, so that'll be pretty awesome with the new bars.